Well, we're in the chronological Bible, and we're taking a look at the writings of Solomon, one of the wisest and richest and one of the best kings that there was, except that he didn't finish well. And as he reflects on his life, he recognizes that apart from God, everything is vanity. Now, that's important that you understand. Apart from God, everything is vanity. And yesterday we took a look at some of the background for this. Today we're going to look at one of the issues that he examined, and that is wisdom. Now, when I was in a business career before God called me into the ministry, we used to have a saying that scientists and engineers learn more and more about less and less until they know everything about nothing. And that salespeople learn less and less about more and more until they know nothing about everything. And purchasing managers had to know everything about everything because they had to deal with salesmen and engineers. Well, I can remember that very clearly that when we first were married, we had a young man that lived next door to us. He had a wonderful job, high-paying job with Pratt Whitney Aircraft, United Aircraft. And they were doing a lot of rocket work at that time. And in that rocket work, they needed his skills, which were very specialized. He was a fluid flow engineer. Now, he wasn't just an engineer, and he didn't just look at fluids. He looked at fluid flows. And when Pratt Whitney stopped doing their rocket work there in West Palm Beach, he was forced to move back to Ohio because there were so few people who were looking for somebody so specialized as a fluid flow engineer. Well, I think it's very, very interesting that when Solomon looks at wisdom, he says that it's much wisdom leads to much grief, and it incurs much pain. Now, I think it's very, very interesting that when Lois and I were married around the same time as we were living next to that fluid flow engineer, that in our church we had a young man, probably not 18 years of age, but he was brilliant, had an IQ that was incredibly high. And he looked at the environment and he looked at the world, and he continued to become so obsessed with the fact that everything was going to come to a crashing halt, that the world would self-destruct, that the world would be destroyed, and that the economy and that the world of war and everything else was going to be devastating. And it worried him so much as he gained all of this wisdom about the environment, about the people, about all of the economy and everything else, that he finally committed suicide. So we see that much wisdom brings much grief, and we know that it brings much pain. We can get degrees, and we can even get a doctorate, but the more we learn, the more there is to worry about. But things very seldom happen in a linear way. That is, if the environment is losing its oxygen, it doesn't necessarily always lose it at the same rate that it has been losing it. Or if the Earth's crust is cooling, it doesn't necessarily continue to cool at exactly the same rate. So you can't base everything. Nor can we ever know the total future and what things will change and what things won't change. And it's probably a blessing in disguise, because if we knew exactly when we were going to die, or we knew exactly when a catastrophic situation was going to occur, we would probably treat life totally differently, and we would probably have less joy and less pleasure out of life, knowing that that catastrophic event was coming. So I've said all of that to say this, same thing that Solomon said. Everything that we look at in wisdom brings grief. And that doesn't mean we should stay stupid and we shouldn't continue our educations, but it just says sometimes having too much information is dangerous. We had a good example of that between Lois and I today as we looked at the COVID vaccines, and there's so many different reports out about the COVID vaccines, some saying this is absolutely the best way to continue to protect yourself against getting very sick with COVID, and others saying if you get this shot, you're probably more likely to get COVID, and so many different people reporting so many different things, and sometimes very confusing because it's not even the same vaccine. It may be a vaccine from a year ago, and the studies are just now coming out, and the vaccine that's available today is different than what was available a year ago. It's very, very easy to get all upset and all concerned about vaccines, the COVID, the different strains of COVID, and all of these different reports and all the different agendas. Obviously, drug companies want to sell us all of the drugs they can sell us. And obviously, there are those that want to think that there's a plot and a motive behind everything that's out there. And we've got to try to decide the balance between the information and misinformation that all of us are getting. So we know that Solomon, as he looked back, he said, yep, wisdom doesn't get it. You can have all of the wisdom in the world, and all it brings is much more pain and much more grief than not having all of that wisdom. And he says it's all just vanity. That's my thought for the day. God bless you.